All right, so I'm going to start from here again. My system shut down for whatever reason, and I'm not sure if the part that I recorded earlier is still retrievable or not. I hope it is, because we've gone over quite a few slides. Uh, but I'll continue going on from here, and then at the end see if I'm able to put it back together. If not, then I guess I'll just have to redo the first few slides um, again. All right, so we are looking at the liver, as we can see on slide number 133 here. Okay, and let me, so here, yeah, we were at this picture before the system went out, and you're looking at the two lobes, the right and the left lobe on the inferior side of the liver, the quadrate lobe at the top, and then the caudate lobe at the bottom, as we see here, the inferior vena cava, the gallbladder itself, and then the porta hepatis, which is the area containing these three structures, the hepatic artery, the hepatic portal vein, and then the common hepatic duct all together, okay? So now looking at the liver under the microscope, as far as the histology of the organ is concerned, so the cells that make up the liver are called hepatocytes, which literally means liver cells, as you can see, okay? And then portal triads are a triad, three things again, which is found at the periphery of each lobule of the liver. That includes the hepatic bile ductule, branches of the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic artery, okay? So again, these three structures together make up the portal triad. And then a central vein, which is found at the center of each lobule, okay? And these central veins come together to form the uh, hepatic sinusoids. And the hepatic sinusoids, again, are these leaky capillaries that allow for blood to diffuse throughout the liver, okay? And these all central veins come together to eventually form the hepatic vein. And the hepatic veins will eventually drain into your inferior vena cava, and the blood will be carried back to your heart for further pumping, okay? So the hepatic artery is a branch of the celiac trunk from your abdominal aorta. It carries oxygenated blood to the liver. The hepatic portal vein, that is an extremely important structure, because the hepatic portal vein carries all of the digested food stuff from your gastrointestinal organs to your liver for further processing, okay? So nothing gets past the liver from your gut. All the food that you eat, which is absorbed into your lymphatic system and then into your hepatic portal vein, it's carried to the liver for further processing, okay? Only after the liver has processed and approved the food that you've consumed is it allowed to be drained out into your hepatic veins and then into your inferior vena cava, then back to the heart for pumping out the nutrients to the rest of the body, okay? So that's what we are looking at here. So the liver also has these little Pac-Man cells, these macrophages, as we mentioned before, okay? They are called Kupffer cells, as you can see here, and they clear out harmful substances from the bloodstream, okay? So then what about bile? As we mentioned before, bile is this bitter green fluid which is secreted by the liver, and it's made up of all these substances. There's bicarbonate in there. It's an alkaline substance again. There's water, pigments, cholesterol, and mucus. And the bile salts and a substance called lecithin, they help you break down fats or lipids from the food that you have eaten, okay? So here you can look at the hepatic sinusoids, those leaky capillaries. The entire thing is the hepatic lobule. That is the central vein in the middle of each lobule here, okay? There you have the hepatic duct. Uh, and then you have the hepatic vein, right? The hepatic portal vein, the hepatic artery, and the hepatic duct. All together, these three are called the porta hepatis, as we had seen in the other picture here. So again, here's the portal triad, the three things: bile ductule, branch of the hepatic portal vein, and branch of the hepatic artery. All together, the portal triad is what you're seeing here, okay? And these are those Pac-Man cells, the reticular endothelial cells, also called the Kupffer cells, that clean up all the debris from the liver. And then the small bile canaliculi, you can see all of those structures here. And so this is what the liver looks like under the microscope, right? When you look at it, uh, At high resolution, you will see this is a hepatocyte or hepatic lobule. As you can see, it's roughly a hexagonal structure. Here's the central vein in the middle. You can see it, right? The central vein. And then these little hepatocytes, the cells that make up the entire liver. Um, and in this slide here, this view, you can actually see the bile ductule, branch of the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic artery. Again, the portal triad is what is focused here in the liver lobule. All right, so looking at the hepatic portal system, so what is it basically made up of? It's made up of the hepatic portal vein, as you see here. And what does the hepatic portal vein do? It is formed by the convergence of all these different veins from your digestive organs. So it carries all of the digested food stuff from your intestines, your small and large intestines, to the liver for further processing. Okay. And so after the liver has processed all that food and made sure that there are no food poisoning causing chemicals or nothing that should not be in your bloodstream there, only then is this food stuff allowed to pass by means of the hepatic veins, right and left hepatic veins, into your inferior vena cava. Okay, so the hepatic portal system is important because it basically keeps an eye out for any possible pathogens in the food that you have consumed. So next up, you're looking at something called cirrhosis of the liver. Cirrhosis means that your liver has shriveled out. It has shriveled up into the small fibrous nodular organ, and it's basically useless at this point. So some major causes of cirrhosis of the liver: chronic alcoholism, right? Also infectious hepatitis, especially hepatitis B and C. Chronic infections with those two viral entities can lead to cirrhosis of the liver as well, where it shrivels up into fibrous scar tissue. And when that happens, uh, then you develop something called hepatic portal hypertension, which means since the liver is basically a useless fibrous nodular organ lying there, all of this blood backtracks through the hepatic portal vein into your digestive organs, and all of your digestive viscera get swollen up with backed out blood. So you cannot absorb any food. You have problems with malabsorption, indigestion, right? And you get your body opens up to all kinds of infections and malnutrition as a result of this, right? So some of the signs and symptoms of cirrhosis of the liver and hepatic portal hypertension: weight loss, nausea, fatigue, pain, jaundice, uh, ascites. The fluid starts to accumulate in your belly because, again, the liver is not making your plasma protein. And in the absence of the plasma protein, all of this water spills out of your cells and accumulates into your abdomen, causing ascites. Okay, even dilated veins of the esophagus, which can lead to esophageal varices, as I mentioned. And quite a few of the patients that I saw in the medical ICU during my tenure as a medical resident had to do with uh, fulminant liver disease secondary to alcoholism, also hepatitis B and C infections. I saw a lot of those, and much of my uh, residential work was made up of trying to aspirate, take that fluid out from their belly, right? So ascites aspiration is what I did uh, during those postings that I had in the medical ICU unit. So gallbladder, again, is a muscular organ, right? It's attached to the inferior surface of the liver, as we can see here. And also, um, what gallbladder does is it stores, concentrates, and releases bile. Bile is synthesized higher up into the liver. That is something that we have to remember, okay? And so we already talked about this, the gallstones and some of the risk factors. Hopefully, again, I will be able to convert that part of the lecture, I'm hoping, um, at the end of this recording. And so then, um, yeah, the risk factors was something that were called the 5 Fs, and hopefully I will share that with you again in terms of notes. All right, so next up, the organ that we have here is called the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is this pistol-shaped organ found in your epigastrium in the left hypochondrium, okay? It has a head, as you can see here, a body right about here, and a tail. So these three different regions make up the pancreas, and you can see that it is nestled nicely in the loops of your small intestine. Here is your uh, the duodenum and then the jejunum, right? The first two parts of your small intestine. You can see that the pancreas has this pancreatic duct running across it, a main pancreatic duct and an accessory pancreatic duct, which carries pancreatic digestive juices and pour them out here into your small intestine. So this is the very same organs in a real cadaver. This is a real picture of a cadaver. You can see the spleen. Here's your pancreas. Here's your small intestine, right? The duodenum and then the jejunum. You can even see the left kidney peeking out from under here. All of those structures are available. The aorta, you can see that too. Here's your gallbladder. Here's the liver, right? So you can see quite a few important digestive organs all squished in together in this small area. So it's surgically, it's a pretty active area. Many pathologies are all located here. So if you look at the pancreas under the microscope, you see two types of cells. You see what are called the SNR cells, right? And the SNR cells produce and release digestive enzymes. So this is the exocrine part of the pancreas. Remember, the pancreas is called the dual organ because it has a dual function, both an endocrine function and an exocrine function. The exocrine function is to release the pancreatic digestive juice into the small intestine, right, for digestion. The endocrine part has to do with the areas of the pancreas called the islets of Langerhans, which secrete insulin and glucagon. And both these hormones, insulin and glucagon, are involved with glucose, sugar metabolism, okay? So that's what we are looking at here. This is what the pancreas looks like under the microscope. So those are the SNR cells, the purple ones. They secrete digestive pancreatic juice. This is the islet of Langerhans, right? And this is the endocrine part of the pancreas, the part that secretes insulin and glucagon. So you're looking at both of those regions within the pancreas. So pancreatic juice is alkaline, mostly water, also bicarbonate ions, as you can see here. It has all kinds of enzymes to help you digest your food, like pancreatic amylase to digest starch from your starch only comes from plant foods, right? Pancreatic lipase to digest fats or triglycerides, okay? And nucleases, which digest your nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Pancreatic cancer is one disease entity that we're going to talk about here. Who gets it most? It, again, has a genetic component, tends to run in families. Also, people who are smokers. Smoking has a very noticeable link to pancreatic cancer. Okay, also people who have long-standing pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, okay? And so they are also likely to develop it. Some of the signs and symptoms: weight loss, vague pains in the abdomen, okay? Nausea and vomiting sometimes, lack of appetite. All of those are some signs and symptoms. They're kind of vague, as you can see here, okay? And what makes this cancer especially dangerous is it's usually not detected in the early stages, okay? So by the time that you get to a a diagnostic stage, it has already metastasized, spread to different parts of the body, okay? So it is a pretty high fatality rate because of that reason. So cholecystokinin, as we talked about, this hormone which was released from small intestine, what it causes is more secretion of your bile from the gallbladder, and also pancreatic juice secretion from your pancreas. That's what it does. Secretin, same thing. It also causes release of bile from the liver and pancreatic juice from the pancreas. So both those, cholecystokinin and secretin, help alkalinize the acidity of the food that comes in from the stomach, right? So they neutralize the stomach acids. Okay, then starts the large intestine, also called the colon. It starts at the region called the ileocecal valve and continues all the way to the anus. The main function of the large intestine is reabsorption of water and some nutrients from the food. This is also where, in the large intestine, that is, where you have these important bacteria that synthesize vitamin K and vitamin B. And we need both of those vitamins for healthy functioning, okay? So what are some of the important structures found here? The cecum, which is the first portion of the large intestine, as you can see here, and the vermiform appendix. And most people are aware of this region very well because appendix can often get inflamed, causing appendicitis, which needs to be surgically removed in most cases, all right? So then the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon, here in this picture you can see, this is where your small intestine merges with the large intestine at the ileocecal valve, right about this region, right? This is the ileocecal valve, here's the cecum, and this is the vermiform appendix, this organ protruding from that area. Then you have the ascending colon, on the right side of your abdomen, the transverse colon that hangs like a curtain across transversely in your abdomen, just below the diaphragm, and then the descending colon on the left side of the abdomen. Here's the sigmoid colon, this S-shaped colon, and then finally the anus, the anal canal here. All right, and you can see the abdominal aorta in the background breaking down into the left and right common iliac arteries. You can see those two. So then we are down to the anal canal. The anal canal is lined by stratified squamous epithelium, as you can see here, okay? And you have two sphincters in this region. The internal anal sphincter, which is not under your voluntary control, and then the external anal sphincter, which is under your voluntary control. So when you are toilet training a child, as an example, so he and she is learning the control of their external anal sphincter at that point, okay? All right. So here it is, the rectum, the area where your food is stored in the form of feces after the water has been reabsorbed and much of the nutrients have been reabsorbed from it. And then onwards, it continues into the anal region here. So what you can see here in this region are your rectal and your anal veins, okay? And also the sphincter, the external anal sphincter, which you can contract to control the passage of feces, of course, right? So why these anal and rectal veins are important is in the case of hemorrhoids. 1 in 3 Americans will develop hemorrhoids at some point in time. So if you're overweight or obese, if you're pregnant, if you have any condition like chronic cough or prostate enlargement where you have to strain constantly and you're a heavy lifter, your intra-abdominal pressure rises and you have core abdominal muscles, your risk factors for developing hemorrhoids increase significantly, right? Hemorrhoids are inflamed, painful, bleeding anal veins. That's what hemorrhoids are, okay? And so, one of the presenting sign that you will see in hemorrhoids is usually fresh blood when you go defecate, right? So risk factors for hemorrhoids, risk factors and signs and symptoms, right? So fresh blood on the toilet paper and also itching and pain in the anal region, of course. These are some of the initial signs and symptoms of hemorrhoids. Now, they can be of different varieties. So you can have first degree hemorrhoids where there's just some itching and discomfort in the area. You can have second degree hemorrhoids where the anal veins actually protrude out of the anus when you strain and defecate. And then there's third degree hemorrhoids where the hemorrhoids are permanently, like they're stuck. They're protruding out of the anus, literally. And once you get to that stage, third degree hemorrhoids, then surgery is the only option to cure that condition, right? But in the primary and secondary hemorrhoid situation, you can look at some certain other treatment strategies like something called a sitz bath. And sitz bath is nothing more than uh, a warm tub of water, right, with some salt mixed in it and just immersing your behind in it, sitting in it 3 times per day for 15 minutes, okay? So that affords significant relief, all right? So you can also look into a band treatment for hemorrhoids, and band treatment is simply where you literally take like something that looks like a band or a ring and you use that to insert the hemorrhoids back into the anal canal, right? If both of these conservative measures fail, then you can consider the surgical route, and that is something called hemorrhoidectomy, where you surgically remove the anal cushion along with the inflamed veins that are basically causing all the signs and symptoms there. Tinea coli. Tinea coli are, again, as we see here, these thin longitudinal bundles of smooth muscle which are found in your large intestine, okay? And what they do is they pretty much hold your intestine intact and they kind of cause these hostrations. So it's kind of like a belt situation, right? Where there's these pockets held together by means of the Tinea coli and these protrusions of your large intestine, these sac-like protrusions are called the hostra or hostrations. So appendicitis, we talked about that situation, right? Which literally means the inflammation of the appendix, right? And inflammation of the appendix can be caused by tiny stones in that region called fecaliths, literally means fecal stones. And they can form because of multiple reasons, mostly because of dehydration, simply because you're not drinking enough water. So these stones can sometimes get impacted in your appendix because it is a narrow region, and so they can lead to acute appendicitis, all right? Rarely it could be a worm infestation, and a whole lot of people carry worms, like pinworms and tapeworms in their, or roundworms in their abdomen, in their intestines without being aware of it. Sometimes these worms can grow to the point where they literally physically obstruct the appendix and thus mimicking the signs and symptoms of acute appendicitis, right? So worm infestation is something else uh, to keep in mind, okay? And so what are some of the classical signs and symptoms of appendicitis? Nausea, vomiting, low-grade fever, especially after having a meal. And this pain typically starts around your umbilicus, right? Around your belly button, and then it tends to radiate and move down to your uh, right lower quadrant over the next few couple of hours. And so these are the classic signs and symptoms. The diagnosis is made based on signs and symptoms, and also a simple X-ray or an ultrasound will show the blockage in the inflammation of the appendix. The treatment is surgical, so you have to surgically remove the appendix, something called appendectomy. Okay. So then let's take a look a little bit more at the large intestine, as you can see here. Okay. And again, remember the main functions of the large intestine are to reabsorb all of the water and any final nutrients from the food before it turns into fecal matter and is stored in your rectum and in your um, and passed out through the anal canal, of course. So here are some of the glands which are found in your large intestine. The goblet cells that secrete mucus, right? You can see those. Um, so this is the typical epithelium or the mucosa that you will see in the large intestinal region, pretty much similar as the small intestine, with the difference that there are no villi. Remember those finger-like projections called villi, which were so predominant in your small intestine, you don't find them here in your large intestine. So again, this is your large intestine under the microscope. Intestinal glands, a bunch of goblet cells for mucus secretion. It's the type of epithelium is simple columnar epithelium, as you can see here, and a lot of smooth muscle in this region. So again, the large intestine is important for your indigenous microbiota there, which means the bacteria that live in your intestine, and every person has a unique microbiota. So if you eat healthy, you get the good kind of bacteria growing in your intestines, and they will promote and make you basically crave those healthy foods even more. So for example, if you're a vegetarian and basically eat a plant-based diet, then your entire microbiota of your gut changes, and those bacteria will crave more and more plant foods. Conversely, if you eat a lot of animal fat, then those bacteria, their population changes and they will crave more and more fat. So you can literally, your diet controls the microbiota and the other way around. So that's why it's so important to eat healthy, because literally what you eat controls the inner ecosystem of your gut, of your intestine, and controls your entire health, as you can see here. Okay, so these are some of the things that happen in your in your large intestine to physically, mechanically, and chemically digest food. Haustral churning, back and fro motion, the slinky motion, mass movements, right? That is when you go to the bathroom, actually 2 to 3 times per day for an average person. But it varies from person to person, depending on how much food you eat, what age you are, how fast is your metabolism, how much water you drink. Some people go less, some people will go more. Um, so then you have something called the gastrocolic reflex. Very simple. When your stomach fills up, you feel this urge to go because your colon contracts when your stomach fills up, right? So, so the defecation reflex is when you relax your internal and your external anal sphincters, right? And so that basically results in defecation. Okay. And voluntary defecation is something you learn with time. After about age 3, that's when you're able to control your bowel movements voluntarily or willingly. So here in this picture, you can look at the entire feedback loop that develops as far as your defecation reflex is concerned. So your rectum is stretched, it fills up with fecal matter, this sends messages to your spinal cord, which sends back parasympathetic nerve fibers, causing you to relax your internal and your external sphincter so the feces can be passed on. Colorectal cancer, all right, it's a fairly common cancer on the rise in the Western world. The second most type of cancer in the United States, actually the third most common now. The lung cancer is the number one most common cancer in the United States. Breast cancer in females is the number two, and prostate cancer in males is number two. And the number three in both sexes is colorectal cancer. So, which literally means cancer of your large intestine. Some of the risk factors: family history, genetics, your advancing age, also your diet. The more animal fats that you've consumed throughout your lifetime, the higher your risk. Being obese, being overweight, having a history of ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, low fiber diet, all of those are risk factors, all right? The signs and symptoms, they appear late. Uh, and a few tests that you can do that are actually recommended starting age 50 is things like colonoscopy, right? Colonoscopy, where they literally take a colonoscope and they look at the insides of your colon to make sure that there are no tumors or masses protruding there. And also a less invasive procedure called FOBT, for fecal occult blood testing. Fecal occult blood testing. So here they take a sample of your stools and they have this coffee paper, coffee filter paper like stuff, and they put the fecal matter on that paper. If it changes color, the paper that is, that indicates the presence of red blood cells in your feces. And that could be an early sign. Bleeding, occult, hidden bleeding in your stools can be an early sign of colon cancer, all right? So if it's detected, then again, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and surgery is what are indicated here. All right, so next up, we are looking at something called fecal transplant, okay? And this is a procedure done to treat uh, colon infection with a bacterium called Clostridium difficile, as you can see here, all right? And so what happens here is you literally take fecal matter from a donor and you put that fecal matter in the colon of the patient using a colonoscopy procedure or an enema. Sometimes you can even take pills, like pills with fecal matter in it from a donor patient. Uh, and so this fecal transplant, what this healthy fecal sample does it basically kills off and changes the microbiota of your own gut. So it tilts it towards the healthier kind, right? And it may help with signs and symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and those kinds of things. All right, some other pathologies that have to do with your large intestine, um, diverticulitis and diverticulosis. Now, what this is it's simply uh, when a piece of your large intestine gets lax and loose and weak and it protrudes out, it kind of forms a bag. So here's your normal intestine and here's a bag that is formed, right? So the food, instead of going straight through your intestine, some of that food collects here into your diverticulum. This is called a diverticulum, this weakened sac or pouch that forms. So this food keeps collecting here, and that causes problems with, it could be infected. The food can get infected, and it's lying there, and there's always a chance of your intestine rupturing because of that. A diverticulum which has ruptured, leading to peritonitis, and now you need surgery. Diverticulitis is when this pocket of food gets inflamed in your large intestine, okay? And again, it's life-threatening if it ruptures or and leaks into your peritoneum. So the treatment here again is, well, prevention. So drink adequate amounts of water and also eat fiber, because fiber makes you regular. You go to the bathroom more regularly, your chances of getting constipated are less, so there are less chances of you developing diverticulosis and diverticulitis. But if it does get to that stage where you have inflammation of the diverticulum in your large intestine, then you have to do surgery, and you have to surgically remove that sac or that weakened pouch that is formed there. Constipation, again, not being regular. The number one reason why you're not regular is because you don't drink nearly enough water as you need. So drinking water and eating fiber. Cellulose, fiber is like fruits with skins, like cherries, strawberries, pears, any fruit that is eaten, consumed along with the skin, apples, that is good fiber. So that'll make you more regular, okay? Lack of exercise, being overweight, low physical activity, all of those can basically contribute to developing constipation. Diarrhea is the exact opposite. When you go too frequently and these thin watery stools, what can cause it? Food poisoning, infections of the stomach, even emotional upset. Um, those conditions can cause diarrhea as well, all right? And so the treatment is dependent on what's causing it. So stress management and removing the food poisoning, the cause of food poisoning, um, and all of those things. And you also have anti-diarrhea pills that slow down the motion of your intestines, okay? So what organs are considered part of the lower GI tract? The small intestine, the large intestine, and everything onwards, the anal canal. What are the three anatomic structures that increase the surface area of the small intestine? The villi, the microvilli, the circular folds. Which type of motility is primarily responsible for mixing the chyme and accessory gland secretions within the small intestine? Segmentation, to and fro, the slinky-like motion. Which one is for propulsion? Peristalsis, when the smooth muscle contracts to move the food along. Where do deoxygenated, nutrient-rich blood and oxygenated blood first come together within a liver lobule? At the porta hepatis, or the portal triad, as we mentioned before. Does the liver produce digestive enzymes? Yes. In terms of, well, bile. So if not, what substance does it produce that assists in digestion? Bile. What are the primary functions of pancreatic juice? Digestion. Okay. Uh, what is the pathway of chyme from its entry into the large intestine until feces is eliminated? So large intestine, like from ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, anal canal, and then out. What are the general functions of bacteria within the large intestine? They synthesize vitamin B and vitamin K. They also help us break down certain foods that we couldn't otherwise. Which substances are typically absorbed by the large intestine? Electrolytes and water. Okay, so here we are looking at the digestive process that takes place in our GI tract. All right, so what do we break down? Let's start with carbs first, the carbohydrates. So you have the simple sugars, glucose and fructose, called monosaccharides. Then you have the disaccharides made up of two simple sugars like sucrose and maltose, and polysaccharides which are long chain sugars like starch and cellulose. So these are broken down in our GI tract. So where does it start? So for carbs, it starts in our mouth when we secrete saliva, right? Because saliva has, first of all, an enzyme called salivary amylase. The salivary amylase breaks down starch into glucose, okay? Then, once the food gets into your stomach, then there you have something called pancreatic amylase. And actually, it's in your small intestine. And pancreatic amylase further breaks down starch into glucose, as you can see. So it carries on the work of the salivary amylase down here. So here in this picture, you can see the pancreatic amylase breaking down starch into glucose, okay? All right, so what else? So once these complex sugars are broken down into simple sugars like glucose and fructose and lactose, that's when they're easily absorbed across the epithelial lining of your small intestine, as we can see here on this slide. So celiac disease, also called gluten-sensitive enteropathy, about 1% of US population is affected with it. This again is an autoimmune disease, which means it's more common in females by definition, right? And what happens is they're sensitive to this protein in wheat, rye, and barley products called gluten. So whenever they eat gluten products, it stimulates their immune response, immune cells to the point where there's damage to the villi of their small intestines, all right? So in celiac disease, in severe celiac disease, something called SPRU, SPRU. Uh, if you have that condition, then literally those finger-like projections called villi that disappear. So you have flat intestines, no villi there. So obviously, if you have no villi, then no absorption of nutrients. So you develop malabsorption syndrome and cramps and diarrhea and bloating and all of those things in someone who has celiac disease. All right. So the treatment, of course, is to avoid gluten-containing products, to have a non-gluten diet, and you have to supplement your diet with pills at times, all right, uh, in order to avoid damage related to gluten. All right, so let's talk about protein digestion now. The protein digestion begins in your stomach under the influence of an enzyme called pepsin. Okay, pepsin breaks down protein into amino acids. And then there are some other proteases, enzymes that break down proteins found in your small intestinal juice, like trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, and procarboxypeptidase. Um, And these are inactive forms of the enzyme. They get activated into further active products, like trypsinogen gets converted into trypsin. And trypsin basically goes on to activate chymotrypsinogen into chymotrypsin, which is the active form, and procarboxypeptidase to carboxypeptidase. Altogether, these are all proteases. They break down proteins into amino acids. That's what you have to remember, okay? So here in this picture, you can look at those three: the trypsin, the chymotrypsin, and the carboxypeptidase working together to break down proteins into smaller amino acids for easier absorption. Okay. All right. So next up are lipids or fats, and so the primary form of fat storage is something called triglycerides. And it's called triglycerides because here you have one glycerol attached to three fatty acids, so triglycerides. Okay. And triglycerides not only contain fats and are not only an indicator of your fat ingestion, but also your sugary foods, your carbs, all right? So triglycerides, you can think of it as a marriage between fats and sugars. They come together to be stored as triglycerides. Cholesterol is a waxy fatty substance that you can only take in from animal foods, okay? So how do you break down these fats, these lipids? It starts in your mouth with something called the lingual lipase, okay? And the lingual lipase basically is activated not in the mouth, even though it's secreted in the saliva in the mouth, but it becomes active once it gets down to your stomach. And there you also have something called gastric lipase. And this enzyme is also produced by your chief cells of the stomach. Together, the lingual and the gastric lipase, they digest about 30% of your triglycerides right there, okay? And then in the small intestine, you also have something called pancreatic lipase, which further breaks down triglycerides into monoglycerides, okay? And then of course, bile. Bile helps with emulsification of fats. So emulsification is pretty much like what happens when you add dish detergent to your greasy, oily dishes, right? It loosens the fat and turns it into globules that can be easily digested. So that's what we are looking at here. Bile salts basically help with breaking down and digestion of fats in your diet. Okay, so what happens once the fats are broken down and they are absorbed by means of the small intestine? Well, uh, so lots of fats actually enter your lymphatic system by means of the lacteals, as you can see here, all right? And then they also uh, enter your bloodstream, and then they get delivered to the liver and the other tissues in your system, okay? So here in this picture, you can see the bile breaking down emulsifying fats, and also the pancreatic lipase, lingual lipase, gastric lipase, all of those breaking down fats into these small particles called micelles, which can be easily absorbed and digested um, and assimilated across the small intestine, as you can see here. All right, so then next up are your nucleic acids, which are DNA and RNA, and they are broken down by two further enzymes found in your small intestinal juice called deoxyribonucleases and ribonucleases. Deoxyribonuclease breaks down DNA, ribonuclease breaks down RNA, okay? All right. And then water absorption, much of it happens in your large intestine as well. About 8 liters out of the 9 liters that you ingest on an average are reabsorbed, okay? And small amounts of water are allowed to pass out in feces. If you didn't have any water in your feces, then of course you will develop constipation. So to prevent that, some of the water is passed out there as well. And so your electrolytes are also reabsorbed, okay, in your small intestine. Primarily, that's what you're looking at. These are your fat-soluble vitamins. Remember the acronym CADE, vitamin K, A, D, and E, and these are also absorbed along with fats in your small intestine. You need these for different reasons. Vitamin B12 especially is needed for your red blood cell formation, and so patients who suffer from pernicious anemia, they do not have nearly as much vitamin B12 because they are lacking the intrinsic factor required for its absorption, so they need vitamin B12 injections. All right, those shots in order to give them adequate amounts of vitamin B12.